The storm rolled across the crimson dunes like a living thing, whispering static against the visor of Elias Ward's helmet. He trudged through it with the mechanical rhythm of a man who'd long stopped believing in rescue. Every few steps, the wind clawed at his exosuit's plating, rattling loose fragments of old Terran steel he'd scavenged to keep the joints moving. The HUD flickered, low power warning blinking like a heartbeat. He ignored it. He always did. The ridge ahead was marked on his map as Sector 43B, though he doubted any human had ever walked this far from the crash site. He climbed the slope, breathing hard, until the sky opened into a valley of glassy black spires, each one humming faintly with blue energy. Ancient Elendari tech, still alive after millennia. Beautiful, and deadly. He crouched beside one of the spires, scanning it with his wrist tool. Power readings off the charts. Too hot to touch, he muttered. Just like my ex. The suit didn't laugh. It never did. He moved along the ridge, eyes scanning for usable scrap. His survival had become a routine of scavenging and repairing, like a machine pretending to be human. Nights he'd talk to himself, out loud, if only to hear a voice that wasn't wind or static. But today, the static wasn't just static. Beneath the howl of the storm, a sound pierced through, high, sharp, and terrified. He froze. Adjusted the suit's sensors. Another scream, clearer this time. Not a human tone, not mechanical either. Something alive. He hesitated, checking the readout. The signal came from a kilometer south, deep in the jungle edge. He cursed softly. Going there meant burning precious energy and risking a malfunction in the storm. But the sound came again, desperate. And Elias Ward had never been the type to walk away from a distress call. He jogged down the dune, each step sinking into the crimson sand. Lightning crawled across the sky like fractured glass. When he reached the jungle's edge, the temperature dropped abruptly, air thick with moisture and luminescent spores. The ground glowed faintly blue under his boots. He switched to low-light vision and advanced, careful not to trip the roots coiling like serpents. The scream came once more, closer now. He raised his pulse rifle, the weapon humming softly, and stepped into a clearing. She was cornered. Small, slender, with pale blue skin that shimmered in the faint light. Her back pressed against a stone pillar, eyes wide and glowing silver. Around her, 3 predators circled, long-bodied beasts of chitin and sinew, moving in jerks like broken machines. Their teeth dripped luminous saliva. One lunged. Elias fired. The shot cracked through the clearing, blue plasma tearing the creature apart mid-leap. The others shrieked, scattering briefly before regrouping. He fired again, but the rifle sputtered, battery dying. Not now, he hissed, slamming the reload slot. The beasts darted in different directions, learning his rhythm. They were smarter than they looked. The girl made a sudden sound, something between a sob and a warning. Elias dropped to one knee, pulled a small device from his belt, and threw it. It burst midair, scattering a field of flickering light. The creatures paused, disoriented, their bodies shimmering with confusion. He charged. The exosuit whined as he drove a knife through the nearest predator's neck, sparks and blood spraying together. The last one lunged, claws raking his shoulder plate, but he caught it mid-air, slammed it to the ground, and fired his wrist torch straight into its eye. The smell of scorched flesh filled the clearing. Silence followed, broken only by Elias's ragged breathing and the hum of the jungle. He turned toward the girl. She hadn't moved. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, eyes darting between him and the dead beasts. He raised a hand slowly, palm out, trying to appear non-threatening. "It's okay," he said, though she couldn't understand him. "They're gone." She flinched when he stepped closer. Then, almost against her will, her hand lifted toward him, a trembling, cautious gesture. Her fingertips brushed his armor, leaving faint streaks of glowing dust. He realized she was bleeding from her side, the wound deep but clean. Without thinking, he knelt and opened the medkit compartment on his thigh. She recoiled at first, but he gestured gently for her to stay still. When he applied the sealant foam, she gasped, but didn't resist. Her skin was cool under his gloves, almost metallic. Up close, her features were delicate, humanoid but unmistakably alien. When he finished, he motioned toward his camp beacon blinking faintly on the horizon. "Shelter," he said, pointing. She tilted her head, uncertain, then glanced at the corpses around them. Slowly, she nodded. They walked in silence through the glowing forest, her bare feet soundless against the moss. He noticed how her hair shimmered faintly with each movement, catching the light like strands of fiber optic. She moved with a strange grace, despite her exhaustion. Every few steps, she looked back at him, not in fear anymore, but with wary curiosity. When they reached the edge of the dunes again, the storm had calmed. The horizon was painted in violet light, the planet's twin moons rising together. His camp was little more than a tarp, a generator, and the remains of his shuttle's fuselage, but to her it seemed like a fortress. She touched the metallic hull, murmuring something in her language. He could only guess what she said, but the tone was soft, almost reverent. Inside, he handed her a ration pack, gesturing that it was food. She sniffed it, then took a tentative bite. He removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face, short dark hair matted with sweat. She stared for a long moment, as if studying a creature she'd never imagined existed. Then, with slow deliberation, she spoke a single word. "Alien, musical." He didn't understand it, but he smiled anyway. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Nice to meet you too." Outside, the storm faded to silence. For the first time in months, the air around him felt less empty. In the flicker of the campfire, two exiles from different worlds sat side by side, the glow of alien eyes reflected in human ones. Somewhere beyond the dunes, deep in the jungle, something watched. The planet held its breath. And Elias Ward, the man who thought he'd been left to die alone, had just changed the fate of a world without realizing it. Morning came late on Orith Prime. The air glowed faintly turquoise, heavy with mist that made every sound feel distant. Elias sat near the generator, tightening the coil on his pulse rifle. The power core was cracked, again. He muttered to himself, "You save one alien, and suddenly your luck evaporates." His suit's diagnostic screen blinked a warning he ignored. Across the camp, Kalira slept curled up under a thermal blanket, faint luminescent patterns pulsing along her arms like the heartbeat of another world. When she stirred, he looked up. Her eyes flickered open, silver meeting human brown. She blinked, uncertain where she was. Then she noticed him and froze, muscles tense. Elias raised both hands, palms out. "Hey, easy," he said, voice low. "You're safe." She didn't understand the words, but something in his tone reached her. She hesitated, then sat up slowly, the blanket slipping off her shoulders. The wound he'd sealed looked better already, her kind healed fast. The biofoam had bonded perfectly with her skin, something he hadn't expected. He slid her a canteen of water. She took it carefully, watching his every move. When she tasted the liquid, her expression softened slightly. A tiny sound escaped her, something that might have been thanks. Elias smiled, though he didn't say anything more. Words didn't matter much here, gestures did. He stood and pointed toward the open horizon where the jungle ended. "Out there," he said, "bad idea." Then he mimed sharp teeth with his fingers, making a growling noise. Her eyes widened, then she actually laughed, a quiet, melodic laugh that surprised him. He found himself chuckling too. "Yeah," he said, "you get it." As he worked on the rifle, she wandered curiously around his camp. She touched the metallic hull of his broken shuttle, tracing the jagged edges with fascination. She tapped a solar panel, startled when it hummed to life. Her hair caught the morning light, scattering tiny reflections across the sand. He watched her for a while before realizing she'd started humming, a rhythmic tune, alien and haunting. It blended with the hum of the generator, turning the lonely camp into something almost alive. He decided to show her the basics of his gear. Picking up a small multi-tool, he activated its holographic interface. She stepped back, startled by the light projection, then inched closer, her eyes wide. He pointed to the tool, then to himself. "Human," he said, tapping his chest. "Human." She tilted her head, trying to mimic the word. "Who, man," she said, the sound strange on her tongue. He grinned. "Close enough." Then he pointed to her, gesturing questioningly. She hesitated before touching her chest lightly. "Kalira." He repeated it, careful with the syllables. "Kalira." She nodded, smiling faintly. Something eased between them, an unspoken truce formed out of shared curiosity. By mid-morning, Elias decided to risk moving out. They needed more food and maybe salvageable tech. He packed a field bag and gestured toward the dunes. "Come on. Stay close." She didn't understand, but when he started walking, she followed. Her movements were soundless, almost ghost-like. He noticed how she scanned the horizon constantly, her senses sharper than his sensors. They trekked across red sands toward a ridge where fragments of old Elendari machinery jutted from the ground like skeletons. The remains pulsed faintly with energy. Dangerous, but useful. Elias crouched near a half-buried core, scanning it with his wrist module. "Stable enough," he murmured. Kalira stood behind him, her gaze drawn to the humming crystal veins that ran through the wreckage. She reached out as if sensing something deeper, and the whole structure gave a low, resonant hum. He glanced up sharply. "What did you?" The hum deepened, and lights rippled through the ruin like waking nerves. A pulse of energy surged outward, knocking them both to the ground. The air filled with static and distant echoes, like whispers trapped in metal. When it faded, the jungle around them fell silent. Elias pushed himself up, coughing. "Okay, maybe don't touch glowing alien artifacts." Kalira looked shaken, clutching her head as though hearing something painful. Her breathing quickened, panic flashing in her eyes. Elias approached slowly, hands raised. "Hey, it's okay. It's over." She trembled, then grabbed his wrist suddenly, eyes pleading. Through that touch, he felt a rush, images flickering in his mind, ruins, fire, tribes, and a towering shadow in the jungle. It was gone as fast as it came, leaving him dizzy. He stared at her. What the hell was that? She looked just as confused. Then she pointed toward the distant jungle, speaking rapidly in her language, words tumbling out in fear. He caught none of it, but her tone told him enough. Something dangerous had just woken up. They hurried back toward camp as the light began to shift unnaturally. The air grew thicker, colors deepening into hues that didn't belong to a normal sunrise. Elias could feel the hum of energy even through his boots. When they reached the camp, his generator lights flickered and died for a moment before rebooting. Kalira stood motionless, staring toward the jungle's edge. Elias followed her gaze. There, far off among the glowing trees, something moved, shadows too large, too deliberate to be mere animals. The sound of distant calls carried across the wind, not mechanical but hauntingly melodic, like voices woven into the storm. Kalira whispered a word he couldn't translate, but the fear in her tone made his stomach tighten. He stepped closer to her, pulse rifle ready even with its weak charge. "We'll be fine," he said quietly, knowing she couldn't understand a word. Still, she looked at him, really looked, and seemed to believe it. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of ozone and something floral. Then, from beyond the dunes, the same humming energy he'd felt before returned, faint but unmistakable. Elias exhaled slowly. "Guess we woke the neighbors." Kalira stayed beside him, her hand brushing his arm just once, a small, instinctive gesture of trust. He didn't move away. Around them, the alien world seemed to pulse with new life, watching, waiting. Whatever had been set in motion out there, Elias knew this planet wasn't going to let him remain a spectator anymore. Night fell like a curtain of liquid glass, the jungle shimmering in shades of blue and violet. Elias sat by the fire pit, cross-legged, tinkering with a fried circuit board under the dim glow of his helmet lamp. Sparks spat as he soldered two frayed wires together with the tip of his plasma knife. He muttered curses under his breath, the kind only a lonely engineer would say to himself. Across the camp, Kalira sat quietly, arms wrapped around her knees, her silver eyes reflecting the flame. She hadn't spoken since they'd returned from the ruins. She had seen something, he could tell by the way she kept glancing toward the jungle, like it was whispering secrets to her. The hum that had followed them still lingered in the air, subtle but constant, vibrating in the bones more than in the ears. Even the wildlife had gone silent, as if the entire planet were holding its breath. He switched off the lamp and leaned back against a rock. So, he said to the empty air, either I've made friends with an alien, or I'm talking to a hallucination. Kalira's gaze flicked toward him. She didn't understand the words, but she seemed to recognize the tone. He smiled faintly, half amused at himself. Don't worry. I talk a lot when I'm nervous. You'll get used to it. She tilted her head, curious. Then, after a long pause, she mimicked his earlier motion, tapping her chest lightly. Kalira, she said again. He nodded. Yeah, I remember. He pointed at himself. Elias. She hesitated, then tried the sound. Elias. He gave her a mock salute. Perfect. Congratulations, you've passed the advanced course in Terran linguistics. Something shifted in her expression, a hint of amusement, barely there, but it made her look younger. For a moment, the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. Later, when the fire dimmed to embers, she stood and walked toward the edge of the camp. Elias followed her gaze. The dunes glowed faintly under the twin moons. In the distance, streaks of light moved, slow, deliberate. Not lightning. Something else. He squinted, adjusting his visor. Heat signatures, he murmured. Multiple. Coming this way. Kalira said something sharp, urgent. She pointed toward the dunes, then at herself, then made a sweeping gesture like gathering. Her expression carried a single clear message, they're coming. Elias grabbed his rifle, checked the charge, only 40% left. Friends of yours? He asked. She shook her head quickly. Tribe, she said haltingly, struggling with the word. Then she pressed her palm to her heart. Thalna. He frowned. Your people. She nodded once, then added something in her own tongue, softer, almost ashamed. He couldn't catch it, but he understood enough. She hadn't told them about him. Maybe she wasn't supposed to. Minutes later, the first figures appeared on the ridge, tall, slender silhouettes outlined by the moonlight. They moved like shadows through the mist, weapons of organic crystal glinting faintly in their hands. There were 6 of them, maybe 7. Kalira tensed beside him, torn between fear and hope. Elias lowered his rifle slowly, trying not to appear threatening. Let's play this smart, he murmured. No sudden moves. The group descended in silence, spreading out with military precision. Their armor was alive, vines, scales, and light fused together, pulsing softly with each step. One of them, taller than the rest, approached. Her eyes glowed a deeper shade of silver than Kalira's. The others followed her lead, surrounding the camp in a half-circle. Elias raised his hands, palms open. Hey there. No need for. The leader barked a command, and 2 of them leveled their weapons at him. The ends pulsed with green energy, humming in warning. Kalira stepped between them, speaking rapidly, her voice trembling. The leader's gaze flicked to her, then to Elias. She said something curt, sharp as a blade. Kalira replied in a tone that sounded like defiance. Elias could only stand there, feeling like a misplaced ghost in someone else's war. Then the leader stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint scars running across her cheek. She studied him, his armor, his face, the strange metal devices hanging from his belt. Finally, she spoke a single word, low and disdainful. Kalira answered softly, eyes pleading. Whatever she said made the leader's expression change from suspicion to surprise, then to something more complicated. The leader motioned for the others to lower their weapons. Slowly, they obeyed. Elias exhaled, tension easing slightly. "That's progress," he whispered. Kalira glanced back at him and nodded faintly. Then she said something to the leader, pointing to the corpses of the predators he'd killed earlier, still half buried near the edge of camp. The leader followed her gesture, walked to the remains, and crouched. When she looked back at Elias, her eyes had changed. No longer just wary, now curious. She said something brief, then extended her hand. Her fingers were long and elegant, the skin faintly luminescent. Elias hesitated, then shook it carefully. The gesture seemed to shock the others, whispers rippling through the group. The leader regarded him for another moment before speaking a final phrase that sounded like an order. Kalira turned to him, struggling to find words. "Come," she said finally. "Tribe, want see." Elias blinked. "Wait, see me? Or judge me?" She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes said both. He sighed, grabbed his pack, and slung the rifle over his shoulder. "Fine. Lead the way." As they began to walk toward the distant glow of bioluminescent trees, he caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the ridge, darker shapes prowling just beyond the firelight. Predators again, or something worse. The Thalna warriors noticed too, tightening formation around him. One of them handed Kalira a slender weapon grown from bone and light. She accepted it silently, glancing once at Elias. He met her gaze and nodded. "Yeah. I see them." The wind shifted, carrying faint mechanical roars from the jungle depths. The leader barked a command, and the group began moving faster. Elias followed, half running through the shifting sand. He could feel the hum of the planet under his boots, like a pulse accelerating. By the time they reached the edge of the jungle, the light from his camp had vanished behind them. Ahead, the forest shimmered with veins of living light, and somewhere deep within it, something massive stirred. Elias tightened the strap on his rifle and muttered, mostly to himself, "I really should have stayed in bed today." Kalira glanced back, her lips curling into the faintest smile, as if she understood the joke even without the words. Then the tribe vanished into the glowing trees, and Elias Ward, the last human on Orith Prime, followed them into the unknown. The forest thickened as they moved deeper, each step a careful negotiation between roots that writhed like serpents and the glowing flora that pulsed underfoot. Elias followed the Thalna silently, noting how they moved as one, their bodies weaving through the jungle with an unnatural grace. Kalira stayed close, her hand brushing his arm occasionally, a grounding reminder that he was not entirely alone. Eventually, they reached a clearing where the trees arched overhead, forming a natural cathedral. The air hummed with the energy of the living forest, and luminous vines curled along the trunks, casting pale blue light across the scene. In the center, a stone circle rose from the ground, etched with markings older than Elias could comprehend. His suit sensors detected residual energy, biological and mechanical, layered in ways he had never seen. The tribe paused at the edge, forming a semicircle around him. The leader stepped forward, silver eyes sharp and unyielding. Elias raised his hands slowly, palms open, trying to signal he meant no harm. The leader regarded him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, her gaze sweeping over his exosuit, his weapons, and finally resting on Kalira. Kalira stepped forward, speaking rapidly in her language. The words flowed like a song, urgent and pleading. Elias caught only fragments, but the tone was clear. She was vouching for him, explaining, defending, urging the leader to listen. The leader's expression softened slightly, though caution still lingered. Then one of the younger warriors stepped forward, her weapon lowered but her posture tense. "He saved her," Kalira said again, voice trembling. "Saved me from the predators. He did what our tribe cannot." The words were simple, yet weighty, carrying the weight of survival, bravery, and the unspoken truth that humans could act with a combination of ingenuity and empathy the Thalna had long forgotten. The leader considered this. She knelt beside one of the fallen predators, scanning the wounds. Plasma burns, improvised traps, and the precise strikes on vital points. It was unlike any Thalna method. She rose, eyes meeting Elias's. In that moment, he felt the scrutiny of a species older than the human colonies, a gaze weighing worth, strength, and character simultaneously. Kalira stepped beside him, placing her hand lightly on his arm. Through the contact, he felt a surge of emotion, a bridge between human logic and Thalna intuition. He realized she was transmitting more than words, she was offering understanding, a shared perception of what had occurred. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the silent conversation. The leader finally spoke, a series of clicks and resonant tones that vibrated in the air. The younger warriors responded, and the discussion began in a language he could not parse. He watched Kalira's reactions, reading her expressions and gestures. She was translating in spirit if not in word, conveying the nuances of intent, honor, and the weight of his actions. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Elias stood patiently, letting the Thalna assess him. His training in diplomacy and survival merged. He offered no unnecessary words, only presence, respect, and calm. Slowly, tension began to dissolve. The leader made a final gesture, one that signified acceptance mixed with challenge. He was welcome, but only if he could prove himself further, if he could integrate his ingenuity with their ways. Kalira exhaled, relief flickering across her features. She turned to Elias, eyes bright, and whispered the only word he understood clearly, safe. He allowed himself a small smile, but the weight of responsibility pressed immediately onto his shoulders. Safety was temporary. This tribe, though wary, needed guidance and protection, not just survival. The predators in the jungle were only the beginning. The real threats were the shifting dangers of a world in decay. Rogue Elendari constructs, environmental hazards, and the fragility of the Thalna themselves, fractured as they were by time and isolation. The leader gestured toward a path leading deeper into the forest, and the entire group moved as one, with Elias following. Kalira walked beside him, occasionally pointing out hazards, mimicking his gestures, and slowly bridging the gap between human and Thalna comprehension. As they moved, Elias observed the subtle differences among the Thalna women. Some were fierce hunters, muscular and precise, their eyes reflecting a sharp intelligence. Others were scouts and gatherers, moving with a delicate grace that belied strength. Every movement was calculated, every glance intentional. They were a living network of awareness, their survival dependent not just on skill, but on the trust and communication between them. Elias felt the strain of observation pressing on him. The more he learned about their abilities, the more he understood that he had to adapt, not dominate. His human ingenuity was powerful, yes, but alone it would never suffice here. Empathy, understanding, and collaboration were weapons as sharp as any blade or plasma shot. Kalira suddenly froze, sensing something he had not yet detected. She raised a hand, signaling silence. Through the quiet, he heard it too, a low vibration, subtle but distinct, resonating through the forest floor. Something moved in the shadows, larger than any predator they had encountered. The leader's posture stiffened, and the younger warriors shifted instinctively, weapons at the ready. Elias lowered himself slightly, careful to stay visible but non-threatening. The vibrations grew, accompanied by a deep, mechanical hum, Elendari origin, corrupted and wild. His pulse quickened. This was the moment the tribe needed him to act, to combine human foresight with their instinctual knowledge. Kalira pressed her hand against his arm, her touch steadying. He felt her fear, her hope, her trust. And in that instant, Elias understood the fragile balance he had entered. The jungle was alive with dangers, the tribe's eyes were upon him, and every choice he made from here on would ripple outward. The mechanical growls shifted closer, and the shadows began to coalesce into forms tall, twisted, and unnatural. Elias adjusted his grip on his rifle, scanning the horizon. Kalira murmured a word he couldn't translate, but her tone was urgent, commanding, and full of expectation. He nodded to her, a silent promise. "I won't fail," he whispered, mostly to himself. The Thalna leader met his gaze, her expression unreadable but attentive. Elias felt the weight of an entire species' hope pressing lightly against his shoulders. With the jungle vibrating around them and the night deepening into an oppressive, electric silence, Elias Ward stepped forward into the unknown, ready to prove that human courage, ingenuity, and empathy could indeed change the course of lives beyond his own. And somewhere in the glowing canopy above, the jungle watched, waiting to see if the stranger from another world was truly worthy of their trust. The next morning, the jungle was alive with movement, subtle but unmistakable. Elias woke to the soft rustle of leaves, the distant calls of unseen creatures, and the faint vibration under his boots that had become a constant hum. He glanced at Kalira, who was already awake, her silver eyes scanning the canopy with sharp precision. She rose silently, gesturing for him to follow. They moved together toward a ridge where the light began to fracture through the dense foliage. From that vantage, Elias could see figures approaching, dozens of them, moving with coordinated grace through the bioluminescent trees. The shapes were unmistakably Thalna, but unlike Kalira's small scouting party. These were warriors, hunters, leaders. Their bioarmor shimmered with the subtle pulse of living energy, each one unique but part of a greater rhythm, a larger organism that moved as one. Kalira's hand brushed his arm, steadying him. She whispered a word he didn't understand, her tone a mixture of awe and apprehension. Elias squinted through the filtered light, counting at least 20 warriors, all women, advancing steadily toward them. Some carried crystalline weapons that refracted the ambient light into shifting rainbows, others bore living shields, thick with foliage and intertwined bioluminescent fibers. Elias raised his hand slightly, signaling non-aggression. The leader of the approaching group, taller and older than the rest, paused at the edge of the clearing. Her hair shimmered silver blue, longer than Kalira's, flowing with a life of its own. Her eyes scanned Elias in a silent, deliberate assessment. He met her gaze, standing firm, showing no fear, no weakness. The leader spoke a series of resonant tones, clicks, and hums, the language alien and melodic. Kalira responded quickly, translating imperfectly, though the emotions came through clearly. The new tribe had heard of him, of his courage, his ingenuity, and his compassion. They had come to witness him, to judge him, and perhaps to seek guidance. Elias exhaled slowly. He had been alone for weeks, surviving by improvisation, relying on wit and luck. Now he faced an entire tribe of alien women, judging not his weapons, but his character, his ability to act under pressure, to protect, to inspire. He felt the weight of their expectation, heavy and precise, like a gravitational pull he could neither avoid nor resist. Kalira stepped forward slightly, raising her voice in a series of commands and explanations. The leader listened intently, eyes narrowing, then softened in subtle acknowledgement. She gestured to the surrounding warriors, and they shifted, forming a circle around Elias and Kalira, their posture tense but not immediately hostile. The silence stretched. Elias's pulse quickened, but he forced calm, assessing the tribe's body language, the way their eyes flicked to one another, the subtle cues of threat and deference. He realized that this was more than a greeting or a challenge, it was an evaluation, a test of whether he belonged, whether he could be trusted, whether he could protect not just Kalira, but this entire faction of Thalna. Then the distant vibrations began, a low, pulsing tremor beneath the forest floor. Elias's instincts went taut. He motioned for Kalira to step back slightly. The leader's eyes followed, flicking to the horizon where shadows shifted unnaturally among the trees. The Vorith, the corrupted predators born from rogue Elendari constructs, were near. The tribe reacted instantly. Warriors raised their crystalline weapons, shields extended, bodies moving in an orchestrated response to a threat that Elias had never seen coordinated on such a scale. Kalira's hand touched his arm, sending a subtle wave of emotion, fear, urgency, hope. He understood the language of intent without needing translation. Elias stepped forward slightly, raising one hand in a gesture of leadership, the other resting on his rifle. He scanned the approaching line of Vorith, calculating angles, distances, and possibilities. The tribe's leader tilted her head, silently questioning, silently daring him to act. Elias took a deep breath. He activated his nanoforge, pulling out improvised traps, energy grenades, and makeshift devices cobbled from the ruins he had scavenged. Kalira assisted, passing him components and gesturing rapidly. The other warriors watched, curious, assessing whether human ingenuity could complement Thalna precision. Minutes later, the first Vorith emerged, a hulking form of metal and sinew, eyes glowing with corrupted energy. Elias fired the pulse rifle, hitting its flank. Sparks flew, and the creature roared, staggering backward. The Thalna immediately reacted, flanking it, striking with crystalline blades that sliced through its corrupted armor. The synergy was imperfect but promising. More Vorith followed, moving in calculated waves. Elias adjusted traps, timed energy bursts, and coordinated signals with Kalira, who relayed instructions to the surrounding warriors. Each movement combined human improvisation with Thalna instinct, creating a rhythm neither species had mastered alone. The battle continued, tense and precise. Predators fell, some to human ingenuity, others to Thalna skill. The leader observed silently, her gaze never leaving Elias. With each successful maneuver, her expression softened, respect forming where suspicion had been. Finally, as the last Vorith fell, the jungle returned to an uneasy calm. Elias wiped sweat and grime from his brow. Kalira glanced at him, eyes wide, filled with relief and unspoken admiration. The tribe's leader stepped forward, her posture relaxed for the first time. She approached Elias slowly, examining him with a gaze that weighed survival, courage, and honor. Elias met her eyes steadily, knowing words were unnecessary. Actions had spoken. The leader's shoulders relaxed, and she extended a hand in a gesture of acknowledgement. Elias shook it carefully. Around them, the tribe murmured among themselves, a sound Elias could not understand, but which carried the weight of acceptance. Kalira touched his arm, a small smile forming. "They trust you," she said, her voice soft but certain. Elias allowed himself a quiet nod, understanding fully the responsibility he had just accepted. The Thalna women had come not for vengeance, not for judgment, but for guidance. They had come seeking a leader who could combine human creativity with their ancient wisdom, a protector who could stand against the dangers of Orith Prime. The jungle pulsed gently around them, alive with light, life, and lingering tension. Elias knew this was only the beginning. The Vorith would return, other threats would rise, and the tribes would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. But for now, he had their attention, their tentative trust, and Kalira at his side. As the twin moons rose higher, casting long silver shadows across the forest floor, Elias Ward stepped forward, no longer just a solitary human surviving on Orith Prime, but the reluctant guide to a tribe of Thalna women, their fate intertwined with his own. The Thalna camp had been hastily reorganized after the battle. Elias stood near the center, surveying the women as they moved with purpose, tending to minor injuries, checking weapons, and reinforcing their perimeter with living barriers of glowing vines. Kalira remained at his side, her eyes flicking constantly to him, as though expecting him to react before the danger even appeared. The leader approached, her movements deliberate, measured. She didn't speak at first, simply watching him, gauging his composure, his understanding of the situation, his ability to command without words. Elias met her gaze steadily, refusing to look away, willing her to see that he was capable, even if the language between them was imperfect. Then a sudden screech split the air. From the forest beyond the luminous walls, shadows surged. More Vorith, larger and faster than those from the previous day, lunged toward the camp. The Thalna women moved as one, their crystal weapons shimmering and shields extending, but Elias could see the panic in some of the younger fighters. Experience alone would not guarantee survival. Elias took a deep breath and activated his exosuit's auxiliary systems. The hum of the suit filled his ears, his HUD flickering with targeting vectors. He gestured sharply to Kalira, then to the nearest group of warriors. She understood instantly, moving to relay instructions with urgent hand signals and bursts of resonance that conveyed his intent to the others. The first Vorith slammed into the barrier, claws scraping against living shields, sparks scattering in every direction. Elias fired a pulse shot into its flank, staggering it long enough for two Thalna warriors to strike, crystal blades slicing through corrupted armor. Another beast circled behind, faster than expected. Elias hurled a makeshift energy grenade, timing the explosion to coincide with Kalira's command gestures. The predator reeled, and a synchronized strike from the warriors brought it down. Despite the chaos, Elias remained aware of the tribe's formation. He adjusted his movements to cover blind spots, setting traps and coordinating attacks without speaking. The forest thickened as they moved deeper, each step a careful negotiation between roots that writhed like serpents and the glowing flora that pulsed underfoot. Elias followed the Thalna silently, noting how they moved as one, their bodies weaving through the jungle with an unnatural grace. Kalira stayed close, her hand brushing his arm occasionally, a grounding reminder that he was not entirely alone. Eventually, they reached a clearing where the trees arched overhead, forming a natural cathedral. The air hummed with the energy of the living forest, and luminous vines curled along the trunks, casting pale blue light across the scene. In the center, a stone circle rose from the ground, etched with markings older than Elias could comprehend. His suit sensors detected residual energy, biological and mechanical, layered in ways he had never seen. The tribe paused at the edge, forming a semicircle around him. The leader stepped forward, silver eyes sharp and unyielding. Elias raised his hands slowly, palms open, trying to signal he meant no harm. The leader regarded him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, her gaze sweeping over his exosuit, his weapons, and finally resting on Kalira. Kalira stepped forward, speaking rapidly in her language. The words flowed like a song, urgent and pleading. Elias caught only fragments, but the tone was clear. She was vouching for him, explaining, defending, urging the leader to listen. The leader's expression softened slightly, though caution still lingered. Then one of the younger warriors stepped forward, her weapon lowered but her posture tense. He saved her, Kalira said again, voice trembling. Saved me from the predators. He did what our tribe cannot. The words were simple, yet weighty, carrying the weight of survival, bravery, and the unspoken truth that humans could act with a combination of ingenuity and empathy the Thalna had long forgotten. The leader considered this. She knelt beside one of the fallen predators, scanning the wounds. Plasma burns, improvised traps, and the precise strikes on vital points, it was unlike any Thalna method. She rose, eyes meeting Elias's. In that moment, he felt the scrutiny of a species older than the human colonies, a gaze weighing worth, strength. Silence fell, broken only by the labored breathing of the fighters and the faint hum of the jungle recovering from the chaos. Elias lowered his rifle, scanning the area for any remaining threats. None remained. The tribe had survived, and the immediate danger had passed. Kalira stepped toward him, eyes shining. You, lead, she said, voice trembling but clear. Elias nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The tribe's leader approached, moving slowly, deliberately. She examined him with eyes that seemed to pierce beyond armor and flesh, reading the decisions, the courage, and the empathy that had guided him through the chaos. Finally, she extended her hand, a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect. Elias shook it carefully, aware that this was more than acceptance, it was a challenge and a promise. The tribe had recognized his value, but trust was a fragile thing. Every choice from here on would reinforce or undermine it. The women moved among themselves, murmuring in resonance, adjusting defenses, tending wounds, and consolidating the perimeter. Elias observed, mentally cataloging strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for improvement. He realized that survival here wasn't just about fighting, it was about teaching, coordinating, and integrating human ingenuity with Thalna instinct. Kalira stayed close, brushing his arm lightly as she relayed subtle warnings from the tribe. Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle fully on his shoulders. He was no longer a solitary survivor. He was a strategist, a protector, a bridge between two species. As the forest settled into uneasy quiet, the twin moons casting silver shadows over the glowing foliage, Elias Ward stood in the center of the camp, surveying the tribe. The Vorith were defeated, for now, but Orith Prime remained alive with danger, and the jungle whispered reminders that survival required constant vigilance, adaptability, and courage. He exhaled slowly, scanning the horizon once more. Kalira's gaze met his, and in that silent exchange, he understood that what had begun as a rescue had grown into an unspoken alliance. Humanity's ingenuity and empathy had earned the respect of a people far older and wiser, and the path ahead would test him in ways no human had ever experienced. The night pulsed softly around them, alive and watchful, and Elias prepared himself for what would come next. Dawn crept through the jungle canopy, painting the bioluminescent leaves in faint shades of gold and green. Elias sat cross-legged on a rock, examining a Thalna bioshield that had been damaged in the previous night's skirmish. The material was alive, pulsing faintly as if breathing, and Elias marveled at its adaptability even as he worked to reinforce it with human-engineered nanofibers. Kalira crouched nearby, watching his hands, her silver eyes reflecting both curiosity and cautious admiration. The tribe had grown accustomed to his presence, but there remained an unspoken tension. They observed his methods, evaluated his judgment, and occasionally mimicked his actions, integrating the humans' improvisations into their own established techniques. Some of the younger warriors moved awkwardly at first, hesitant to stray from tradition, but Elias' patient guidance had begun to bridge the gap between instinct and ingenuity. He handed the reinforced shield back to one of the warriors, nodding toward the edge of the camp. "Test it," he said, though the words were rough, alien to her ears. She hesitated, then moved to the perimeter, slamming it against a thick vine with a forceful swing. The energy absorbed by the shield rippled through its surface, glowing brighter for a moment, and she allowed herself a small smile. Elias returned it with a subtle nod. Kalira leaned closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the shield. "Strong," she said softly in her language. Elias grinned, happy to hear a word he could understand clearly. "Stronger together," he added, hoping she grasped the meaning, though she only nodded, eyes distant as if contemplating more than just the shield. Suddenly, a rustle echoed from the tree-line. Elias tensed, scanning with his HUD. A small group of Thalna warriors appeared, carrying wounded members from the previous encounter. They were alive, but clearly shaken. The leader of the tribe moved forward, her gaze meeting Elias, silent acknowledgement passing between them. She gestured sharply, and Kalira translated quickly, explaining that a scouting party had encountered residual Vorith activity deeper in the jungle. Elias exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for a moment. "All right," he said. "We reinforce the camp, then I take a small team to check it out. Quick, precise, no unnecessary risks." Kalira repeated the instructions, and the leader nodded, approving. The other warriors moved to adjust their formations, integrating human tactics into their natural rhythms. By midday, the camp had transformed. Defensive barriers were strengthened with Elias nanofiber lattices, traps were discreetly planted along likely Vorith paths, and the warriors moved in coordinated patterns that blended instinct with human logic. Kalira stayed close, relaying subtle warnings and adjustments, her presence a constant guide and reassurance. Elias led a patrol through the jungle, moving silently between the glowing flora. The Vorith remnants were scattered, corrupted constructs scavenging in small numbers. He marked each location with a sensor beacon, planning traps and alerts for the tribe. Kalira kept pace, pointing out hidden dangers, her hand occasionally brushing his arm in silent communication. They moved as a unit, a fusion of human strategy and Thalna instinct. At one point, a corrupted Vorith lunged from the shadows. Elias fired a pulse shot, but it wasn't enough. Kalira reacted instantly, striking with a crystal dagger that pulsed with her energy. Elias followed with a swift kick that knocked the creature off balance, allowing two Thalna warriors to finish the attack. He glanced at Kalira, who nodded once, her eyes glimmering with respect and unspoken acknowledgement. Returning to camp, Elias began working with the leader directly, teaching her how to modify bioweapons and defensive tools with hybrid techniques. They worked side by side, experimenting with combinations of organic Thalna energy and human engineering. Sparks flew from modified devices, light shimmered across the leaves, and the younger warriors watched, absorbing the lessons through observation. Hours passed. The camp grew quieter as the immediate threat receded, but vigilance remained. Elias sat down near Kalira, sharing a small ration pack. "Not bad, huh?" he asked, half smiling. She looked at him, eyes glinting, and repeated the phrase awkwardly in her language. Elias laughed quietly, the sound echoing softly in the jungle. As twilight approached, a low hum rose from the forest depths. Elias stiffened, sensing residual Elendari energy resonating beneath the ground. The leader observed, alert but composed, and motioned for the warriors to prepare defensive positions. Elias adjusted the placement of his devices, ensuring coverage in critical zones. Kalira guided the younger members, teaching them small adjustments in posture, stance, and response. The first Vorith emerged from the undergrowth, massive and menacing, corrupted energy pulsing along its limbs. Elias fired a precise pulse shot, slowing its advance, while Kalira signaled the Thalna to strike in coordinated bursts. The creature faltered, and the tribe moved as one, guided by human foresight and Thalna instinct. The synergy was imperfect but effective, the creature finally collapsing under combined attacks. Breathing heavily, Elias surveyed the scene. The tribe had survived another trial, but the challenges were far from over. Kalira touched his arm lightly, a silent acknowledgement of teamwork, trust, and hope. Elias felt the weight of responsibility anew. He was no longer just a survivor, he was a strategist, a teacher, and a protector. The leader approached, her gaze steady and approving. She gestured broadly, indicating the tribe's acknowledgement of his role. Elias understood, he had earned not only their trust but a place among them, a responsibility that would shape the survival of both human ingenuity and Thalna tradition. As night fell and the jungle pulsed with life, Elias Ward looked over the camp, Kalira at his side, the Thalna women preparing for the next challenge. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers he could not yet predict, but he knew one truth clearly: together, human ingenuity and Thalna instinct could face anything Orith Prime would throw at them. The twin moons rose over the glowing canopy, casting silver light across the reinforced barriers, the vigilant warriors, and the man who had become the unexpected bridge between worlds. Elias exhaled, steadying himself. The planet was alive, the tribe was ready, and the war for survival had only just begun. The forest was alive with an uneasy stillness as dawn crept across the bioluminescent canopy. Elias stood near the edge of the camp, scanning the horizon. He had spent the night strategizing with the Thalna leader, plotting patrol routes, defensive perimeters, and resource-gathering points. Kalira joined him silently, her hand brushing his arm in a habitual gesture of trust and connection. Beyond the camp, faint movements rippled through the foliage. Elias adjusted his pulse rifle, observing subtle vibrations in the jungle floor. The Vorith were out there, lingering remnants of corrupted Elendari constructs, probing and hunting in packs smaller than before, but no less dangerous. He counted 4 distinct groups, each moving with an unnatural intelligence, avoiding the main paths and using shadows as cover. Kalira tapped his arm, her voice low and insistent in her native tongue. Elias only caught fragments, but the urgency was clear. He followed her gaze to a patch of luminous vines, slightly disturbed. A Vorith had been near here, he realized. They had to act fast. He turned to the Thalna leader, who watched him closely. She spoke in a series of clicks and resonant tones, and Kalira translated rapidly. The leader wanted him to take a small strike team to intercept the Vorith before they reached the perimeter. Elias nodded, understanding the delicate balance. They could not risk the tribe in a full confrontation yet. Elias and Kalira led 3 Thalna warriors through the dense foliage, moving silently. The light shifted through the canopy in fractured patterns, casting shadows that danced unnaturally. Elias relied on his HUD to track residual energy signatures, combining Thalna intuition with human technology. Kalira moved ahead occasionally, pointing out hidden hazards and pathways invisible to human eyes. The first Vorith appeared abruptly, a hulking construct of corrupted Elendari metal and sinew. Elias fired a quick pulse, hitting a weak joint, while Kalira's dagger glowed as she struck at the creature's flank. The Thalna warriors attacked in perfect rhythm, anticipating the creature's movements. Elias noticed the subtle adjustments the leader had taught them overnight, the fusion of human tactics and Thalna instinct in action. 2 more Vorith emerged, circling to flank them. Elias hurled a makeshift energy grenade, timed with Kalira's hand signal. The explosion staggered the nearest predator, allowing the Thalna to strike decisively. Elias used the chaos to reposition, blocking the flanking predator with a rapid maneuver and improvised trap. The fight was brutal and precise. Elias moved constantly, covering gaps, coordinating attacks with gestures and timing cues. Kalira mirrored his actions, guiding the younger warriors, her energy pulsing with subtle signals that Elias could interpret. Each Vorith taken down strengthened the cohesion of the strike team. After the 3rd predator fell, Elias paused, scanning the jungle. More movement appeared in the distance, small, fast, and coordinated. He realized with a jolt, they weren't just hunting, they were learning. The Vorith were adapting, testing their defenses. He had seconds to decide, and he gestured urgently to Kalira. She understood immediately, signaling the warriors to reposition into a tighter, more defensively advantageous formation. A sudden roar echoed from deeper in the jungle. The ground trembled underfoot. Elias's pulse quickened. A massive Vorith emerged, larger and more corrupted than any they had faced. Its eyes glowed with unstable energy, and its presence radiated a malevolent intelligence. The strike team froze for a heartbeat, assessing the threat. Elias's mind raced. This encounter required more than brute force, strategy, improvisation, and the trust of his allies would determine the outcome. He gestured sharply to the team, dividing their approach. Kalira and the 2 warriors fanned out, drawing attention while Elias moved to flank the creature. Using a combination of traps and timed pulses, he exploited weaknesses in its corrupted armor. The Vorith roared, thrashing violently, but each movement had been anticipated. Kalira struck from behind, energy lancing through the creature's core. Elias followed immediately, delivering a disabling shot that staggered it forward. The younger Thalna closed the gap, striking in coordinated blows, reinforced by Elias's improvised pulse traps. The creature faltered, then collapsed with a metallic groan, the corrupted energy dissipating into faint sparks across the forest floor. The strike team exhaled, sweat and relief mingling as the immediate danger passed. Kalira approached Elias, her expression a mix of exhaustion and pride. She pressed her hand against his arm, sending a pulse of recognition and gratitude. Elias nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavier than before. This was not merely survival, it was leadership, guidance, and protection on a scale he had never imagined. The Thalna leader arrived silently, observing the scene. She gestured to the fallen Vorith, then toward Elias and Kalira, acknowledging the human's role in the successful encounter. Her approval was quiet but unmistakable, a recognition that human ingenuity and Thalna instinct had blended into something formidable. The team began moving back toward camp, carefully scanning for additional threats. Elias walked with Kalira at his side, observing the warriors' reactions. The younger members had gained confidence, integrating the lessons of improvisation and adaptation with their natural instincts. He realized that his presence had sparked not just survival, but evolution within the tribe. As they neared the camp, the twin moons began to rise, casting silver light across the glowing foliage. The jungle pulsed softly around them, alive, vigilant, and unpredictable. Elias felt a cautious sense of pride. He had proven himself capable, but he knew the challenges of Orith Prime were far from over. Kalira glanced at him, eyes shimmering in the moonlight. "Stronger," she said simply. Elias smiled faintly, understanding. Together, they had begun forging a bond between species, a bridge of trust, courage, and shared purpose that would define the future of this world. The camp came into view, the Thalna women already reorganizing, adjusting barriers, and tending to the wounded. Elias and Kalira quickened their pace, ready to integrate the lessons of the patrol into the broader defenses. Orith Prime was alive with threats, but for the first time, Elias felt a sense of control, a fragile but tangible hope. And as the night deepened, the forest seemed to pulse with quiet approval, a silent acknowledgement that human courage, Thalna instinct, and the bond between them could withstand whatever the jungle might throw next. The camp was quiet under the rising twin suns, the jungle's bioluminescence fading as daylight crept across the glowing foliage. Elias moved through the center, inspecting defenses and noting minor weaknesses in the perimeter. Kalira trailed close, her eyes scanning the tree-line with instinctive vigilance. The tribe had grown calmer since the last encounters, but Elias knew Orith Prime did not forgive complacency. A sudden ripple in the air caught his attention, a distortion in the light, almost imperceptible, but enough to set his instincts on high alert. He signaled Kalira, who nodded immediately, her hands tracing quick patterns that conveyed subtle warnings. He adjusted his pulse rifle, scanning for movement. The Vorith were adapting, learning to use stealth, and he needed to be faster, smarter. The leader approached from the opposite side of the camp, her movements deliberate and measured. She gestured, her tone resonant and precise. Kalira translated, explaining that the tribe had detected unusual patterns in the jungle beyond the river bend, suggesting not just predators but organized packs of corrupted Elendari constructs. Elias frowned. These weren't random attacks, they were coordinated, evolving threats. He assembled a small strike team, Kalira, 2 of the older warriors, and himself. As they moved through the jungle, the light shifted constantly, filtered by dense foliage. Elias relied on a combination of human tech, thermal scans, motion sensors, and Kalira's Thalna intuition. They communicated in a mix of gestures, resonant tones, and brief words, a hybrid language born of necessity. The first encounter came swiftly. A Vorith pack emerged from a dense grove, larger and more organized than any they had faced before. Elias fired a pulse shot to stagger the leading creature while Kalira and the warriors flanked it, striking precise, energy-laced blows. The creature collapsed, but the remaining pack circled, testing their defenses, probing weaknesses. Elias acted quickly, tossing improvised traps across likely flanking routes. Kalira directed the warriors to adjust positions, creating a moving formation that blended human strategy with Thalna instinct. Each maneuver was synchronized, a dance of offense and defense. The Vorith hesitated, momentarily confused by the hybrid tactics, giving Elias a critical advantage. Another predator lunged from above, striking at Kalira. Elias reacted instantly, intercepting it with a combination of rifle swing and well-timed energy pulse. Kalira twisted away, landing on her feet, then struck back with her crystal blade. The 2 younger warriors executed coordinated strikes, each attack timed with human precision. Minutes passed in tense, calculated chaos. Every Vorith downed revealed subtle adaptations in the next wave, thicker armor, faster movements, more coordinated attacks. Elias realized the constructs were learning from their encounters, forcing him to innovate constantly. He improvised, combining traps with environmental hazards, leading predators into natural pitfalls, and synchronizing strikes with the Thalna's natural agility. Kalira stayed beside him, her gestures rapid and confident, guiding the warriors and relaying his instructions. Their partnership had become seamless, a fusion of human ingenuity and Thalna instinct. Each predator taken down strengthened the tribe's confidence, their trust in Elias growing visibly with every successful maneuver. Finally, the last of the pack fell. Elias exhaled, scanning the area carefully. The jungle seemed to settle, but he knew it was only temporary. He approached Kalira, who looked at him with a mix of relief and pride. She pressed her hand against his arm, sending a subtle wave of acknowledgement. He nodded, understanding fully the depth of her unspoken communication. The leader arrived shortly after, observing the aftermath. She approached Elias cautiously, her gaze intense but approving. She gestured toward the fallen Vorith, then toward the human, conveying a silent assessment. He had proven himself once again, not just as a fighter, but as a strategist, a protector, and a guide. Kalira translated loosely, ensuring Elias understood. Elias surveyed the strike team and the surrounding area. The younger warriors had absorbed the lessons, adjusting their stances and movements, integrating human tactics into their instincts. He realized that the tribe was evolving, not just surviving, but learning, adapting in ways that could allow them to reclaim control over the jungle. As they returned to camp, the twin suns now high overhead, Elias felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. Orith Prime was relentless, its threats constant and evolving, but the bond he had forged with Kalira and the Thalna women had created something stronger than fear or instinct alone. They had begun to trust human ingenuity, and he had begun to understand their deep instincts in return. Back at camp, the tribe reorganized, tending to minor injuries, reinforcing barriers, and integrating the new traps and strategies Elias had devised. The leader observed silently, her expression unreadable but her eyes reflecting approval. Kalira approached Elias, her hand brushing his arm lightly, a silent gesture of gratitude and reassurance. Elias allowed himself a quiet moment to breathe, knowing that this was only the beginning. The Vorith were learning, adapting, and so must they. The survival of the tribe, and perhaps the balance of Orith Prime itself, depended on constant vigilance, innovation, and trust between human and Thalna. As the jungle pulsed softly around them and the light from the twin suns filtered through the canopy, Elias Ward prepared for the challenges ahead, aware that his role as protector, strategist, and bridge between worlds was far from over. The tribe depended on him, Orith Prime demanded resilience, and the bond with Kalira had become a guiding force that neither species could ignore. The jungle pulsed with life as the twin moons rose over Orith Prime, casting silver light across the forest canopy. Elias stood at the center of the Thalna camp, surveying the women as they moved with purpose and precision. Over the past weeks, they had transformed from a cautious, fragmented group into a cohesive unit capable of coordinated defense and rapid adaptation. Kalira stood beside him, her eyes bright, reflecting trust and pride in ways that transcended words. The night was quiet, but Elias remained vigilant. His pulse rifle rested across his shoulders, traps and sensors scattered throughout the perimeter, and the warriors were positioned strategically, a living network of awareness that blended instinct with human ingenuity. He had learned their rhythms, and they had learned his strategies. Together, they had become something neither species could achieve alone. A distant hum reached his ears, the faint, irregular vibrations of Vorith movement. Elias narrowed his eyes and gestured to Kalira. She moved instantly, signaling the tribe to take defensive positions. But as the vibrations grew clearer, it became apparent that this time, the threat was different. It wasn't a rogue pack, but a scout unit, small, deliberate, almost hesitant, as if testing the tribe's new defenses. Elias stepped forward, adjusting his sensors. He realized the Vorith were not mindless anymore, they had been adapting, learning from their encounters. Yet tonight, the tribe was ready. He watched as Kalira relayed his strategies to the warriors with rapid gestures and resonant tones. They executed flawlessly, moving in patterns that combined their natural agility with his human-engineered traps. The first Vorith emerged from the shadows, and the tribe reacted in unison. Pulse shots, crystalline strikes, and environmental traps struck simultaneously. The creature faltered, confused by the hybrid tactics, giving Elias the chance to deploy an energy net that immobilized it temporarily. Kalira's dagger delivered the final blow, precise and swift. 2 more Vorith followed, testing the tribe's formation. Elias guided the warriors to reposition, predicting their moves and anticipating weaknesses. Every strike was coordinated, every trap precisely timed. The creatures lunged, but the combination of instinct and strategy overwhelmed them. Each fell in turn, and the jungle seemed to hold its breath, watching as human ingenuity and Thalna skill proved victorious. As the last predator collapsed, a profound silence settled over the forest. The camp exhaled collectively, relief washing through the tribe. Elias lowered his rifle, scanning the area. Kalira approached, placing her hand lightly on his arm. In that simple touch, he felt gratitude, admiration, and a bond forged in shared struggle. The Thalna leader stepped forward, her expression unreadable at first, then softened into a subtle acknowledgement. She gestured toward Elias and Kalira, then to the warriors, signifying respect, approval, and recognition. Kalira translated the essence of her gestures. The human had proven himself not just as a protector, but as a leader, a bridge between species, and a source of inspiration. Elias exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of their acknowledgement. He had come to Orith Prime as a solitary wanderer, a human surviving by wit and courage. Now he stood as a trusted guide, a strategist whose ideas and empathy had earned the loyalty of an entire tribe. The women moved among themselves, adjusting their formations, tending to minor injuries, and reinforcing barriers, but now with a confidence that came from knowing they were capable, prepared, and united. Kalira stepped closer, her silver eyes meeting his. "We are ready," she said softly, the words carrying both meaning and certainty. Elias nodded, understanding the depth of her message. The tribe had evolved, they could defend themselves, adapt, and thrive. His role had been crucial, but their courage, skill, and unity had been just as essential. The forest pulsed gently around them, a living, breathing entity that seemed to approve of the newfound harmony. The twin moons reflected off the bioluminescent vines, casting long, silver shadows over the camp. Elias walked slowly through the tribe, acknowledging their presence, offering subtle gestures of respect. They responded with quiet, synchronized movements, a silent testament to the trust that had grown between them. A distant rustle from the edge of the forest drew his attention, but Elias recognized it as nothing more than nocturnal creatures resuming their routines. The immediate danger had passed. Orith Prime was still alive with threats, but for the first time, the tribe felt in control, prepared, and capable. Elias allowed himself a small smile, the kind that comes after uncertainty, struggle, and triumph. He returned to Kalira's side, and together they looked out over the glowing forest. The path ahead remained uncertain, but they no longer faced it alone. They had each other, and the tribe had become a force capable of resilience, courage, and adaptation. Elias realized that humanity's strength lay not merely in technology or firepower, but in empathy, ingenuity, and the ability to inspire loyalty across worlds. The Thalna leader approached one last time, her gesture simple yet profound. Elias understood, they had accepted him, not just as a protector, but as part of their people. The bond was now unbreakable, forged through trials, courage, and shared purpose. Kalira squeezed his arm lightly, a quiet celebration of the alliance they had built together. As the night deepened and the forest hummed softly, Elias Ward allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He had survived, he had protected, and he had guided. Orith Prime had tested him, the Thalna had judged him, and together they had emerged victorious. The human wanderer was no longer alone, he was part of something greater, a tribe, a family, and a symbol of hope on a distant world. The twin moons shone brightly above, illuminating the path forward. Elias and Kalira stood together, ready to face whatever challenges might come, knowing that with courage, empathy, and ingenuity, they could endure anything. And for the first time on Orith Prime, a deep, satisfying calm settled over the jungle, as if the planet itself had acknowledged the triumph of unity, trust, and the enduring strength of humanity.